until some God comes in and says, I am in fact the God of the universe and I am the moral authority, and people are forced to recognize that this is the case, then the only thing that's happening is Glenn's saying God is the foundation of morality and I'm saying humans are. And nobody is going to be, neither of those systems is going to work for people who don't accept that that's a foundation.
Do people have to all recognize this foundation in order for it to be the foundation?
No, and people don't need to recognize that 2 + 2 = 4 for it to be the case that 2 + 2 = 4, and for you to go to your grave proclaiming that 2 + 2 = 4. Even if the whole world said it was otherwise, then 2 + 2 would still equal 4. People don't need to recognize a moral truth to be a moral truth for it to be moral.
They do if you're talking about a moral system. If you want to create, computer code and get people to start programming in it, you've got to be able to convince them about ones and zeros.
Yeah.
So 2 + 2 = 4 isn't even in the same ballpark of there is a God. It's either true or it's not, but it's not a foundation for something. If you're talking about a moral system, the true foundation is agreement on what the foundation is, that the three of us care about human beings. And then we can start arguing about how much we care and where there's going to be conflicts and everything else. But we can't do any of that until we agree on that foundation. And if Glenn's foundation is there's a God at the bottom of this and he can't demonstrate that, then we're not even going to get started on solving the problem.
That's not what 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of in this conversation. 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of all human beings are worthy of provision and protection. All of them. Right? Would you agree with that? All members of the human family, no matter what their achievements, no matter what their attributes, all members of the human family are worthy of all provision and protection.
I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem. It's definitely a problem, especially when you've got people who are discovering disabled children in the womb.
When I say I have no idea, it's about that simplification. My instinct is, of course, to say yes.
It's a very Christian instinct.
Thank you. That's a very atheist response. The instinct, of course, say yes. The problem is that when we start talking about the specific in the language, there are going to be rights conflicts that we have to address.
Sure, but all other things being equal, as a general principle, would you say that what Glenn has laid down there is one that you could agree to? The importance of treating
sure,
all members of the
in the general colloquial sense, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what's your point then, Glenn? That this 2 + 2 = 4, as it were, this agreement, that doesn't exist just on the basis of Matt's preferences. It's a fact in the way 2 + 2 = 4 is a fact, as far as you're concerned.
Yes.
See, and that I don't quite so much for you. That I don't agree with. It is certainly there are things that we're going to agree on. That I don't know how you could ever demonstrate that this is in fact like true, like some intrinsic truth about for example, I think human lives have incredible value. I don't think they have any intrinsic value. I don't think the universe cares at all about human life. They have value because they have value to us.
And who's us?
Humans.
All humans?
Well, cognitive able humans who are able to consider the proposition of whether or not they have value.
Which is the strong, and that's my problem, is that it becomes an ever shrinking circle of humanity that we have, and it's the strong who rule over the weak.
Well, the characterization of evolution as being strong over the weak, I would argue isn't necessarily accurate, but it's also because there's no decision there. It's whatever survives, survives. And what is strong in one sense, a weakness may become a strength depending on the situation. That's what evolution does. It's not like, ooh, me, He-Man, you weak, I'm going to kill you type thing. Maybe, for example, sickle cell anemia provides protection against certain things. And so while it may be under certain circumstances, there's a reason why animals develop camouflage and other changes. It's because
why in your view was it wrong for, I'm sorry to invoke Godwin's law, even though we're near the end of the program, why was it wrong for Hitler and the Nazis to, euthanize disabled people and gay people and people that they felt were outside of their circle of who they considered to be human? What was the kind of...
I'm not convinced they considered them outside the circle of what they considered to be human. They had a view that these were somehow inferior humans. I think they would all acknowledge they were human, just that they were somehow inferior or less diverting. Yeah, race. Things like that.
The master race.
So it's one of those things where people say...
Because a lot of people would say Hitler was wrong about a fact there, whereas from what I'm wondering, like, and we're getting to the issue of, is there this objective moral value to humanity? And in
Well,
a sense,
it reminds me of the people who argue that, hey, slavery is really good for the slave owners. And so if you're a slave owner, you can look at this and say, hey, slavery is a good thing because it benefits me. The problem is that when you look at the larger picture, it's actually not necessarily good for the slave owners. And beginning to recognize that every member of society affects potentially every other member fundamentally changes, and it shifts our in-group, out-group dynamic. So that when Hitler goes after the Jews for whatever religious reasons he had, for whatever superior, uber guy reasons he had, that's fundamentally different from whether or not killing them makes society worse or better. And it's kind of this thing of, oh, this is what I think makes us better, which is independent from what actually makes us think better. Nobody, not Sam nor I nor anybody, is suggesting that if we begin with an agreement on well-being as a foundation, that there aren't going to be things that we think we have the right answer about and find out we were wrong.
At that stage, then, it would seem like instead of having World War II, we would have a symposium in which the Nazis would present their papers and others would present other papers, and then we'd have a panel and we'd discuss them and we'd try and thrash it out. At what stage do you say that their vision for updating, for evolving, for having a master race, at what stage do you say that is morally unjustified and therefore there is a just war that can be fought against them?
What? I don't know that there's an answer for that apart from assessing the individual situations, which is what we did. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have to rely on a God for it.
Well, we relied on 1939 years of Christian understanding of what is the good life, and the good life is the sacrifice of the strong for the protection of the weak, and Hitler was doing the exact opposite of that, and so it was very obvious to people in that sense, the evil of the Nazis, and they went and fought a just war against it. But
sure. So it was Christianity that was the credit for ending the Nazi regime, and why people, not even Judaism.
No, it was Christianity that had shaped the West and its moral sensibilities, such that Nazism appeared to them as very obviously the very reverse of the way of the cross.
So this is something you just can't argue with, because it's just an assertion from Glen's perspective, because if we come up with something that is good, we're borrowing from Christianity. There's no way to not be accused of borrowing, because Christianity was around before. And if you find something that was before Christianity, well, that was foreshadowing Christianity. Because the God that he believes in has been there forever. Mm-hmm. So anything true and good that was pre-Christ was God foreshadowing it. And anything is after, it's somebody borrowing from it. There's no response to this. And there's also no way for him to demonstrate that that's what's happening.
Is that a fair criticism, Glenn?
Well, I think we've said from Old Testament to New Testament, we've said from Genesis 1, I totally believe in the same God from the beginning. But I think what is the unique thing about the Christian story is you've got the sacrifice of the fittest for the survival of the weakest. You've got this way of the cross. You've got this way of Jesus, which is unlike the Greco-Roman world. It's unlike the Persian world. It's unlike the Babylonians. It's unlike the Muslim world. It is very like what secular humanists now say about inclusion and welcome and diversity and bringing people to the center and caring for the weak and the
poor.
If
you're very selective about what you read, you know, it'd be really nice about Christianity if it were the nice, unique feature of Christianity was if it could be demonstrated to be true. Mm-hmm. That would be a unique feature among religions, which would be very nice.
Well, we had the God who was the master, came down, became the slave. He paid the slave price.
I know the story.
Yeah.
You can't demonstrate it's true.
Well, we're living in the effects of it. We're living in the ripples of the after effects.
You can't prove that's true
story.
Either. That's just how you're viewing it. I don't think we're living in the rippled effects of people who believe that to be true, which is independent from whether or not it is true.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've all got our different standards of what would qualify as evidence.
Which is why, and this is the thing. This is why I keep saying that I have yet to be presented with an objection from religious, an objection to secular morals that religions solve, and it's not. God could fix this. If there is a God, God could fix this just like that. Just like he could have said, thou shalt not own another human being as property. Instead, he was more concerned about wearing mixed fabrics and whether or not you should eat shrimp, evidently.
I mean, it's a conversation about the old covenant that we can have, but the old covenant's called old for a very good reason. What I've been saying again and again is...
Why would there be multiple covenants? Why can't God just say, here's the way things are?
That's just the law. That's just the law. The law does say, here's the way things are. But as we've both admitted, humans get things wrong. Like what we need is grace. What we need is the God who is the lawgiver to actually come and save us, to actually come and forgive us for all the different ways that we get things wrong.
So I don't think I need a God to come and save me or forgive me. I think I need a God to come down and demonstrate that he exists.
Mm-hmm. The God who comes down, in the Christian sense, is the God who becomes incarnate. But a number of times, Matt, you've used the word of God being sort of a super being, or I don't know, what was the phrase you used? Anyway, a super being, which I imagine to be something kind of within the created order, and who might appear in a cloud and that sort of thing. Are you
talking about today? Because the only time I talked about super being was when we were referencing Nazis.
No, super. Anyway, forgive me.
But carry on.
God is not one more item within the created order. He is the source of being, and so for you to say, why isn't God showing himself? It's a bit like Juliet saying, where is Shakespeare? Like in one sense, where isn't Shakespeare? Okay,
it's kind of the opposite of that, because in that category you have a fictional character asking, where's the real one? And in this one you have the real character asking, where's the fictional one?
Ah, but are you the fictional one?
I'm not. I'm the real one.
I'm a real boy.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah. And yet you did not give life to yourself.
Isn't one of Glen's contentions, though, in a sense, that if you're looking for evidence for God, we find it by looking at the fact that we have this intrinsic view that humans are equal, and that isn't something that we can just deduce from science. Science doesn't have anything particularly to say to our moral values.
Because it's not a truth. It's not intrinsically true. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4.
It's not a mathematical truth. I mean, in terms of morality, are you an objective? Do you believe in objective moral values, or like? Not
the objective foundation, but the objective assessment with regard to the foundation. I think well-being is the best that we've come up with.
But in that sense, so science, as far as it can give us a morality, like Sam Harris says, is once we've agreed what the goal is, and then
right. If you agree on what the goal is, then you can.
There's no ultimate sort of There's no ultimate foundation saying this is the way we should all. This is the goal we should all aspire to. But presumably, Glen, you believe there is some kind of ultimate thing that we're made for, something we're about, a grand narrative we're living in,
right?
And the fact that we recognise that somehow within ourselves, evidence for God in your view?
You can make a moral argument for God's existence. Yes, I do believe God is love, and the good life is to live in love, and I believe that not just Christians can recognize this, and not just Christians do recognize this.
Well, we can do the same thing. So this thing of the fact that we seem to have a desire for meaning, purpose, value, all of those things, he'll use as evidence for the God, because that serves as an explanation for it. I can do that with that exact same example. The reason that Glen sees God as the justification for that is because he's uncomfortable with the possibility that there isn't an explanation for it, or that this isn't some sort of universal truth. So a preference for, I want there to be intrinsic human dignity, gets you to, hey, if there was a God, there would be human dignity, because this God is guaranteeing it. And so that same circular preference is there. I'm just eliminating both of them and saying, I'm going to go ahead because I care about human beings, and I value human beings because I am one, and say, whether there's a God or not, this is what I'm going to go for. And if there's a God that has a better way, they can demonstrate it. Why isn't a Damascus Road experience good enough for everybody?
So the moral argument for God's existence is not that we need some kind of arbitrary moral figure who has some whims and he will enforce them at the point of hell, and therefore it would be better, if we want to live in a moral world, to believe in such a God. The moral argument for God's existence is there is an objective realm of moral values. And the explanation for that objective realm of moral values is not going to be a material cause, because morals are not material things, right? Moral values are not reducible to just biological reality, and thank God for that, because biological reality is the survival of the fittest, okay? But moral values are something distinct from biological values, natural values. you cannot get from those natural values to the ethical values. You can't get from an is to an ought. And you sure can't get from preferences to an ought. You can't get from a like to an ought.
Of course you can. You can always get from preferences to an ought.
No, you can only get from preferences to another preference. It just becomes another preference just backed up with force.
The problem is, well, all right, we're not going to necessarily. So first of all, I don't think we disagree on the is-ought dilemma. But as soon as you get into preferences, that's the objection. The reason you can't get from an is-ought is that you have to inject a preference. It's injecting the preference that gets you to the ought. I would like to live in a world where this happens, therefore I ought to do that. Mm-hmm. The objection on the is-ought thing is this thing. If I start with the foundation of I would like to, is not a problem with what it leads to, but why should I like to?
With the power, I suppose, is what I'm getting. Glenn is saying, if the person in power, say the Hitler, simply has a very different conception of what the best is for his life compared to your life, then do you have any moral, if you like, force to say you're doing something wrong? Isn't he just going with his preferences as opposed to your preferences?
Yes.
So what is it that's up here that says those preferences are better and those preferences are worse? What is that?
This is the objection that's often launched. So I could sit down with Hitler. I wouldn't, because he's dead. But I could sit down with Hitler, and if we could find the thing that we agree about, that we care about, we can then demonstrate which one of our preferences are in conflict with that. If he because what we do as human beings is often delude ourselves, and we look at our preferences and assume they're right. But they're going to conflict with something foundational, which is basically at the beginning of that superiority to secular morality talk. I talked about how you could begin with, let's say, 3 foundational premises. Life is generally preferable to death. Health is generally preferable to sickness. And pleasure is generally preferable to pain. None of them are universally true. Sometimes pain is preferable. Sometimes death may be preferable, which is why I support death with dignity for people who no longer have any hope of a quality of life and with their individual autonomy and control over their own life. But you can begin with those and you can build something. But you can start with anything. You could start with death is better than life, and what you get to is extinction. Sure. And so if I find something, I think Hitler probably, I mean, there's the old joke, Hitler probably loved his mother too. Hitler probably valued human life, just had justifications for excluding certain others.
Right.
And you think you could reason Hitler into...
I don't know that I necessarily could.
Why
because
wouldn't he
there are
reason
people,
you into his way?
It might be. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily the case. I'm saying if you can show that what your actions are and the things that you're justifying are in conflict with a foundation that you agree with, that's where the problem is.
Right. And what if it's the establishment of the master race? Because if the fittest do survive, then wouldn't it be nice if the fittest should survive? Like we take that hop, skip, and a jump, and
sure. And then you ask what criteria are you using to determine fittest?
And again, we're having a symposium when we should be fighting a war, and this is.
No, we should always be having a symposium so we don't have to fight wars. Why would anybody ever say we should be fighting a war?
You sound like Neville Chamberlain. You know, I found peace in our time with Hitler because I'm going to sit down with him.
Well, and I'm sorry that advocating for reasoning rather than blowing crap up is so anathema.
I think we tried to reason with him.
I'm not saying, here's where the confusion is. I'm not saying after the war started, send Matt in and he can sit down with Hitler.
He's very clever.
We're using a precise example to talk about a more abstract one, which is essentially, let's say you and I disagree on, you want to take some action. You want to exterminate some portion of the population. The process that I'm advocating for is for us to figure out what shared foundation we have, if any, which we'll find something shared, and show which one of us is more in conflict with and which one of us is more in keeping with that foundation. Is it always going to be the case? No. But you asked how you would actually solve that, and I would. And if it didn't work, I'd kill him.
and if well-being, just very vaguely just defined, if well-being is the metric that we're using, and if Hitler could say, oh, we are so much better off without the disabled. You have no idea. You know, we're soaring our industry. Our numbers are through the roof. Our well-being is doing incredibly well once we eliminate the sick, the weak, the handicapped. Is he right at that point?
Well, That's when you go through and you talk about what data are you looking at to define well-being, because
What data?
yeah.
You're having that conversation about the data because he's just told you I've eliminated
Oh my
the
gosh,
handicapped.
it's not like I'm talking. No,
Okay, but
He's
because it is
saying-
happening right now. Okay, there is a Down syndrome population, for instance, that's being eliminated globally right now, and we're having a conversation about it. Okay, and I think it's better to have a conversation than to blow people up and all that sort of stuff. But it's a very live issue. I mean, it's not just the Godwin's rule.
I'm just going with the example that you say Hitler comes to me and says, you wouldn't believe how much better our society is off now that we're eliminating these people. Then you have to go back and look at it and say, okay, what have you lost? Is your society better, and are you just looking at the short term? Did you, in fact, how do you know that you didn't lose a cure for disease? How do you know that you're not worse off because it has fundamentally changed your psyche? How do you know that you're not worse off because you've lost art, because you've lost human connection? It's not just, see, this is one of the problems that you could point out to people that are going down there. Well-being is not just what's my
aren't
financial
those people's
well-being.
lives worth something, even if they didn't produce a cure for cancer or great works of art? Even if they just, sat around and consumed all the resources that all the able-bodied people were doing.
If somebody sat around and
I
did
get-
nothing but consume, I don't know how you could consider that as adding value. You have to point to something where they're adding value to society.
Is that what
So they have to achieve, they have to add value, but they don't have value.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying when I say that there's no intrinsic value to it, but
Right.
that I value human life, and that everybody, almost
Who's
everybody,
I? But who's I? You, Matt Dillahunty.
I'm speaking specifically for me, but also
But if
I
someone
think
else
this.
doesn't, you try to reason them out of it. But
What? Yes. What do you? Okay. See, you sit there and you. Okay, let's try it. I don't value human life. Change my mind.
look at the Nazis. Look at that vision of humanity.
I don't care. I don't value human life. Change my mind.
You have yourself a humanity that has dignity. You might not believe it right now.
I don't. Change my mind.
I'm trying to change your mind by saying without achievements, without attributes, without contributing a penny of money, without expending a calorie of effort.
I worry, by the way,
You
that
are
this is going to get cut as if this is really me saying this when it's not.
And I'm counseling you or something. Yeah, I'm your therapist.
I don't even understand why this point is remotely contentious.
What's your point here, though? That if you simply choose not to believe humans have value, then nothing that he's going to say is going to change your mind.
Right,
on
telling me that there's a God or a Jesus,
Right.
that's not going to
Okay.
necessarily change my mind any more than my line of
So
reasoning
what's
would.
your point then, Glenn? Because
My point is that the changing of the mind is not the most important factor that's going on here. It's the immorality of eliminating a whole people group. That's probably a little bit more important.
And I think-
than someone's
we're
openness
talking about-
to conversation.
We're talking about someone who doesn't value human life,
Yes.
not what they've done, but
Yes.
what they think.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
You have to figure out a way to change their mind.
And the best way we've discovered over 2,000 years is to tell a story about the God who becomes the weak and despised and the marginalized and the single cell in Mary's womb.
And I think we
that's
can do
what
better
God's
than
like.
telling a story.
But you think, but what evidence do you have?
Well, give it a shot. There's no reason to think it's not worse.
So,
it's any worse.
Except all the scientific studies that I cited.
brings us nicely to the end of the show. And I'm just going to ask that question one last time. Can atheism deliver a better world in your view, Matt?
I have no idea. And that's genuine. I think that there are things that if you take the good, wherever you find it, religion, non-religious, philosophical thinking, take those things, keep them, get rid of the baggage, how could we not be better off?
And your final thoughts on that one too?
Well, I guess what follows from atheism? I mean, atheism, just a lack of belief in a God. I don't think any kind of moral system necessarily falls out of that. If we're biological survival machines clinging to an insignificant rock, hurtling through a meaningless universe towards eternal extinction, what follows? One thing that might follow is nothing. Another thing that might follow is anything. And therefore, I think, Matt's venture is very much a venture of faith. We want to create more atheists, or at least create more skeptics about the idea of religion, when everything we know about the utility of religion is that it's a net gain, a net win to society, and when the consequences of getting rid of this story, especially this story of the God who became weak, is to have a certain callousness to the whole rest of society. And I think that meta-ethical issue will play out in negative ways about how we treat the least and the last and the lost.
And I agree with him that atheism doesn't necessarily lead to anything, which is why I keep advocating for secular humanism. But when you say that everything we've learned, religion has been a net gain, I'm not convinced.
Well, look, I've really enjoyed the conversation. So, Matt and Glenn, thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you,
Justin. Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely, thanks.